If you've been asked to view this pesticide safety training video, it means you've been chosen as a pesticide handler at the orchard. While you are watching this program, feel free to ask any questions you may have about this information. Even when using DVDs like this one, your trainer is required to be here to answer any of your concerns or questions. There are specific responsibilities and challenges in being a handler, but first things first. You need to be at least 18 years old, unless you are a member of the grower's immediate family. And if you haven't already watched the pesticide safety video designed for both workers and handlers, you need to do that before watching this video. As a reminder, handlers are employees that mix and load pesticides, apply pesticides, and even clean and repair pesticide application equipment. If you've seen that video, then you've already been taught how you can be exposed to pesticides at work and how they can enter your body. You know how to reduce your exposure by wearing work clothing to protect you from residues and using decontamination supplies that must be provided for you. You've also been shown the information displayed at the central location, the application information, the safety data sheets that provide hazard information about the applied pesticides, and the safety poster there. You've been taught steps for routine decontamination and how to decontaminate in an emergency. The word handler indicates the responsibility you have with pesticide products. It's critical to understand the particular products you are working with and the correct ways to use, transport, store, and dispose of them. Proper training, preparation, and understanding and following label directions are valuable in making every day a safer one. Because handlers are exposed to pesticides directly, they must be better prepared and properly protected in order to reduce the possibility of breathing in pesticides or coming into direct contact with undiluted materials. That's why it's critical for handlers to read and understand the information on the labeling of every pesticide that they work with. Some of the important information you'll find there includes the product name, ingredients, and the type of pesticide it is. Knowing what you're working with and its proper usage are the first step in any application process. You'll also find signal words and symbols on the label to help you understand how dangerous improper usage or accidental exposure can be. Caution indicates the least toxic pesticide, but it can still be an irritant or make you sick if you come in contact with it. Warning is used for pesticides that can cause moderate irritation or damage to skin, eyes, or any other part of the body exposed to it. The word danger indicates a highly toxic pesticide product that can cause irreversible damage and even death when exposure occurs. It is often accompanied by the word poison on the label to indicate its elevated threat to your health. Another section of information relates the product's directions for use. This will give you instructions on how to properly apply the materials. Closely following these instructions according to the label is critical in keeping yourself and others safe. You'll also find contact information for the manufacturer on the label. This will be helpful if you have additional questions about the product that may not be clear to you simply by reading the label or the safety data sheet. The pesticide label will also show the EPA registration number. This number can be critical in case of accidental exposure. In addition, the product label includes first aid and may have spill cleanup instructions. Your employer is required to make the label available to you while you are handling pesticides, and to make sure you have read or understand the label information regarding safe use. Having a clear understanding of the products you're working with and their proper handling will go a long way toward keeping everyone at the orchard safer. In addition to access to label information and understanding how to safely use the product, another way to minimize exposure is by wearing PPE, or personal protective equipment. You must wear the PPE that are listed on the label for the specific handling task you perform. This can include gloves, boot covers, full coveralls, aprons, eye protection, or even a full respirator mask. Your employer must provide you with the label-required PPE. It must be clean and it must fit properly and be in working condition. Your employer must ensure PPE is worn, maintained, and stored correctly, and must provide a clean place for you to keep your street clothes and a clean area for removing PPE. If a pesticide label requires coveralls, this means that cloth or fabric coveralls are acceptable, and chemical-resistant suits, such as Tyvek, are not necessary. If a handler chooses to wear a chemical-resistant suit, he will not be required to wear the layer of clothing specified on the label, such as long-sleeve shirts and long pants, under that chemical-resistant suit. Keep in mind, PPE alone cannot prevent all opportunities for pesticide exposure. Proper hygiene, such as washing thoroughly with soap and shampoo after pesticide application or potential exposure, is an important part of minimizing negative health effects. After your work activity, proper removal of used PPE is critical in minimizing contact with residues. Remove PPE as soon as you complete the job that required it. First, wash your disposable or reusable gloves with soap and water. Then remove other PPE while still wearing the gloves. Then wash the gloves again with soap and water before removing them. Clean reusable PPE according to instructions provided by the PPE manufacturer or your employer without contaminating yourself. Wash regular work clothes that have been exposed to pesticides properly. Wash them separately from other laundry with detergent and hot water. Dry outside in the sun to help destroy any remaining pesticide. If the pesticide you are to use requires a respirator for the task, your employer must provide you with a medical evaluation to make sure you can safely wear the respirator, a fit test to make sure the respirator protects you, and training before you wear the respirator. The first step is a medical evaluation performed by a licensed medical professional. This doesn't necessarily mean a medical physical, but does involve a series of specific questions aimed at determining a handler's health and safety while working with a respirator on. If your answers indicate you have any of the medical conditions, a medical exam may be necessary, but will not necessarily exclude you from respirator use. This evaluation may need to be repeated. The second step is the fit test itself, which your employer must provide for you. This can be conducted by any person who uses the OSHA procedures to ensure that the respirator fits your face shape, so it provides the necessary protection when you wear it. Fit test services are often easily available from area providers, and easy-to-use kits are available from several safety catalog or online services. You must use the same make, model, style, and size of respirator while applying the pesticide that you wore for the fit test. If your work requires a number of different types of respirator masks, then you must be fit tested for each one. Men with beards cannot safely wear a standard respirator mask because it won't seal properly. Instead, if a respirator is required by a label, they can comply by wearing a unit that covers their entire head, like this helmet-style unit. Handlers using equipment like this, such as a loose-fitting, powered air purifying respirator, won't be required to have a fit test. However, the medical evaluation and respirator training will still be necessary. If your employer cannot provide you with a mask that fits and protects completely, you cannot work with products requiring a respirator until you have one, because wearing the respirator is a label requirement. In addition to a proper respirator, regular visual or audio contact may be required with certain pesticides. For example, handlers applying pesticide products with the skull and crossbones on the label must be checked every 2 hours by sight or sound. Constant voice or visual contact must be maintained with handlers applying fumigants in enclosed space production areas. Working with the employer closely and coordinating proper pesticide applications based on label requirements and directions will produce the best results. Just as important is the employer's responsibility to notify workers of pesticide applications and areas that are under an REI, either verbally or by posting warning signs. All pesticide applications are to be documented with proper paperwork that is to be kept up to date in the central location. Your employer may direct you to perform these notifications. If so, always remember to properly post "Do Not Enter" signs like this one. They are required for outside applications of pesticide materials with an REI, restricted entry interval, greater than 48 hours, and for enclosed space applications with an REI greater than 4 hours. The label may require workers to be notified by posting signs and receiving oral notifications. In other situations, your employer can notify workers verbally. Again, following your employer's instructions and knowing when these signs need to be posted, for how long, and in which areas are critical in keeping your coworkers informed. The pesticide labels have all the necessary details on proper application and how long the REI lasts. We can't emphasize enough the importance of following pesticide label instructions. This is a critical part of keeping yourself and your coworkers safe, and the label is the law. Your employer is also required to notify workers who are at the orchard in advance of any application, so that they can be aware of any potentially unsafe areas. Your employer is responsible for posting of the application records, but they may direct you to record the application information and post it at the central location. Whether you are directed to do the record keeping or not, this information is critical to the safety of everyone at the orchard. During application, wind or other conditions may cause pesticides to land somewhere other than their intended target. This is called drift. As a handler making an application, you must make sure that each pesticide is applied so that it does not contact anyone who is not properly trained and wearing the appropriate protective equipment. Your employer will work with you to make sure you know how to safely and correctly use any equipment to minimize the possibility of drift. Workers must never be permitted to be in areas where drift may occur, and applicators must be aware of any potential exposure to workers and should suspend any application where people may be contacted. The only persons allowed in an area during an application are appropriately trained and equipped handlers involved in the application. The handler should also understand the Application Exclusion Zone, or AEZ, which is the immediate area around the application equipment, which moves as the equipment moves around the treated area. The AEZ should be free of people. This means any person except a trained and properly equipped handler. As a handler, you must suspend an application if people are in the AEZ. The size of the AEZ depends on the type and the height of the application. Application types such as air blast and aerial require an AEZ of 100 feet. Applications with lower drift potential, such as boom sprayers, require an application exclusion zone of 25 feet. Though the potential for drift is often a concern with applications involving mechanical sprayers, it can also happen where pesticides are applied using irrigation systems, a process we call chemigation. In addition to drift, handlers need to be aware of the potential for pesticide runoff or other environmental and wildlife hazards. The product label provides specific information under the heading Environmental Hazards. Improper applications or a spill during mixing and loading can create long-term damage to water, soil, and vegetation. The pesticide label will provide information about hazards to non-target insects, aquatic organisms, birds, and other wildlife. As a handler, you must be careful to follow the label to avoid damage to the environment and wildlife. Again, the most important thing you can do now is to know as much as possible about the pesticides that are used in the areas where you work. Your employer is required to provide information about each application and must explain the label to you if you cannot read it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can even ask a coworker to help you get the answers to your questions. As mentioned in the previous program, pesticide exposure carries potential hazards for handlers and their families. These hazards can include acute effects, or effects that show up during or quickly after exposure; delayed effects, symptoms that may take some time to develop long after an exposure; chronic effects are effects that happen as a result of repeated, small exposures over a long time period, perhaps as long as 10 or 20 years. And sensitization effects are symptoms that show up once your body has reached a certain level of exposure. If you believe you may have been exposed, you need to remove pesticide-contaminated clothing and wash off immediately. Find the nearest decontamination supplies and wash off the pesticide. Your employer must provide the following decontamination supplies: clean water, soap, and single-use towels at the mix and load site, as well as the area where you remove personal protective equipment, and near where you are making an application. In an emergency exposure situation, if there is a pond or stream closer than the decontamination supplies, you should wash in those natural waters. If the label for the pesticide being used requires eye protection, the mix and load site must also have an eye wash system. Whether it's a commercial system purchased specifically or simply a clean, available water source from a garden hose, the eye wash system must have the ability to provide a gentle stream of water in case a pesticide gets in the eye. If that happens, flush the affected eye for at least 15 minutes and then get medical attention as soon as possible. These water supplies should be kept out of direct sunlight to avoid additional injury. As a handler, your employer must provide you a change of clothes such as coveralls or a chemical-resistant suit in case your work clothes become contaminated with pesticides. Another task that handlers may be directed to do is the transporting of pesticides from one location to another. There are some basic recommendations to keep safe while doing so. First, never transport pesticide materials in a passenger compartment or anywhere that people, pets, or livestock may be transported. Do not carry pesticides in the same compartment as food, animal feed, or clothing. Use the trunk of a car or the bed of a pickup truck, and make sure the containers are secure and won't roll around, fall over, or out onto the ground. Make sure the pesticide containers are in an upright position and that there are no cracks, leaks, or loose-fitting caps. Do everything possible to prevent any pesticides from escaping the container. If there are concerns about a container, talk to your supervisor before traveling. Upon arrival at your destination, again, make sure that the pesticides are stored safely and that the containers have not sustained any damage to cause leaking. Pesticides should be kept in a locked storage facility with access only available to those trained and prepared to handle them. It's a good idea to carry spill cleanup materials and PPE with you when transporting chemicals, and coordinate with your employer any cleanup steps or procedures related to each transport. Different chemicals will require specific spill cleanup steps and solutions. Read the product safety data sheet, or SDS, before transporting in order to be clear on specific cleanup details. If you do have a spill, think safety first. If you're not sure what to do, call for help and wait there until help arrives. Do not leave the spill area unattended. If you are going to clean up the spill and you are properly equipped, remember the 3 C's: control, contain, and clean up. Control. Control the source of the spill. Put the container upright. Shut off the equipment or, if possible, put the leaky container inside another container. Contain. Stop the pesticide from spreading by using dirt or other absorbent materials to create a dike around the spill. Put up warning signs or caution tape to keep others out of the area. Clean up. Do not use water. Often this will dilute the product and actually spread the pesticide, making the spill worse. Soak up liquid spills with special sponges, soil, sawdust, clay cat litter, or other absorbent materials. Sweep the spill and clean up material into plastic containers or special drums. The label or the SDS may have disposal instructions for the spilled material. State or federal requirements may require spills to be reported. Your supervisor should be able to provide more specific information. After cleaning up a spill, you should wash thoroughly at the end of your shift. If possible, take a full shower with soap and shampoo at work, then change into clean clothes before you go home. If not, shower promptly when you get home and put on clean clothes. We talked in the previous program about the dangers of heat stress. Because handlers like you will be most often wearing PPE, sometimes in warm weather or in closed spaces like sprayer cabs, heat stress is possible. It's worth repeating that if you think you may be experiencing heat stress, try taking a few minutes in a safe, cool, or shaded area and get something cold to drink, preferably water. Loosen your clothing or PPE and get as much air to cool yourself as possible. Try to have someone stay with you until you feel better. Your employer is responsible for managing heat stress if you must wear PPE to protect yourself from pesticides. Remember, more detailed information about pesticides and other materials you work with can be found on the Safety Data Sheets, or SDS. Recent changes to requirements on how SDSs are written should make them easier to understand necessary hazard and emergency medical information about the pesticides in use. Your employer must display the safety data sheets for all pesticides that you may come into contact with. Your employer will tell you where the central location is on the orchard, where the SDS, application records, and safety information display with emergency contact information are found. Remember, there's no reason to be afraid at work. By selecting you as a handler, your employer places a serious responsibility in your hands. Always be careful when working around pesticides. Pay attention. Understand that there are risks to your health and the health of others, including your family. To protect yourself and others, follow the label, your employer's directions, and the steps we've talked about today to reduce exposure. You'll find that most employers are fair to their workers. Under the WPS, your employer cannot intimidate, threaten, or direct you to perform unsafe tasks in the orchard, or discriminate against and harass you if you refuse or if you attempt to comply with the WPS. If you believe that there are violations of the WPS taking place at the orchard, you can contact your state or tribal agency for pesticide enforcement listed on the pesticide safety information display at the central location. If you want a copy of the pesticide application information and safety data sheets, you can ask for them yourself, or designate in writing a representative to get that information for you. Talk to the trainer for how to designate the representative. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or concerns about the information we just shared, now is the time to ask the trainer. Get the answers you need in order to do your job to the best of your ability. Have a great day.